Hello, I'm Catherine Ramsperger, author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls. I'm also an intuitive coach who founded Ground One and Step Into Your Story. Welcome to my story time. I want to connect and make connections here for those of us always wanting to expand our horizons. And here we are today doing just that. Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to my longtime friend, Ruth Schimel, who has been a career and life management consultant for as long as I've known her. More than 2 decades. She's mentored me along the way. In addition, Ruth is an author of 7 books on personal and professional development, animated by her dissertation on how people discover their capacity for courage. She also leads an interdisciplinary foundation. Previously, she was a management consultant, professor, and diplomat, serving at the State Department, India, Ecuador, and Guatemala. Welcome to Story Time, Ruth.
Thank you.
So good to see you. So good to have you here. Today, we're going to talk about Ruth's most recent book, Happiness and Joy at Work, Preparing for Your Future. I can't imagine a more topical book for our times. So, Ruth, considering all the writing programs and information about the future of work, how is your book different? How is this book different?
Well, most of the books that are out there are about the future of work. It's not about the individual. It's not about what the individual can do to prepare for the future of his or her work. And I think what happens is that you get all this academic blah, blah going on. And I can say that because I've been an academic blah, blah person myself. I think what happens is that the individual gets lost in the shuffle. In fact, MIT and the Harvard Business Review just did a whole, in fact, they're in the midst of doing a whole program on the future of work, and the individual is not mentioned at all in it. I think it's because the people who talk about the future of work are really interested in the generic information. They're not that interested in the complications of what one person can and must do to prepare for the future of his or her work. So it's designed for each reader's benefit. As a result, it's a linear book, and it's also a nonlinear book, because that's the way life is, right? And what happens is that you don't have to read this from start to finish. You can go to whatever speaks to you, whatever seems interesting to you, or you can read it from start to finish. It's interdisciplinary because we're interdisciplinary, and the future of work is going to be interdisciplinary. So it has all kinds of arts and sciences and social sciences references in it without boring you to death. And also, I think that, what?
Your books could never be boring.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, but different people have different reactions to things, right?
Yes.
We're all unique. So it's serious, and it's also humorous. It's playful, like me. So it's also full of illustrations. There are over 100 illustrations in it, and they include photos and drawings and even things you can color yourself, and diagrams for learning and reinforcement. So every several pages, you're going to get something visual, which I think is really important for learning. It also guides the readers to find out what their happiness and joy is to them, which it's not a matter of sort of generic definitions of what happiness and joy are. It really guides you to find your own versions of them. And that's one of the things that I'm proud of. And it's especially important because there are 668 million Google happiness references, 23,000 books, and 659 future of work references on Google. And so this focuses just on what's important to you as an individual. You don't have to go through tons of stuff. It's a continuous learning opportunity, and you can do whatever you want to, but there are endnotes throughout it, and there are links throughout it. So you can dip more deeply into anything. And it also simplifies the complexity of the future of work and how you're going to make it work for you without being simplistic. And I think that one of the ways it does that is by focusing in on 3 things: lifelong learning, soft skills, and applications and anticipation of technology, which none of us can escape. So basically, I think that the book is inspiring, it's educational, it's also entertaining, and it's integrated with in a way for self-empowerment, but it's not a self-help book. It's a how-to book. So in fact, you can get your first bonus chapter free if you go to my website, which I'll tell you more about later, and to the books section on my website.
Well, that's perfect. So there's a lot to unpack there. So as I was reading, first of all, the links will make it lifelong. I mean, it just adds and adds and adds. And I love that about it because it makes it futuristic. It makes it very much in the now. And I'll be reading your book for quite some time to come because of the links and going back to it. And so as I was reading, though, especially as I began reading, I was thinking, can and does happiness exist at work? And then I thought, that kind of depends on your definition of happiness. And if happiness is momentary and ephemeral, why is it so ephemeral? And how do we get those moments?
Well, I'm not going to go into the joy part because I separate happiness and joy so that you sort of have a double opportunity to bring pleasure to your life rather than making
They're
them
very
twins.
different. They're very
different. And I think people make twins out of them, but they're not twins. But basically, I think your skepticism about whether you can be happy at work is well taken, because think about all the variables involved with happiness at work. One is you, and you're you're in motion all the time, and your values and your goals change. Secondly, you're in relationship to a lot of other people who are in motion. And then the environment is also changing. And so you may be happy for a while, but then everything is up for grabs again. And so it's really difficult to sustain it. And that's why I really focus in on you and your situation as opposed to reacting all the time to what's external to you, because then you're going to be playing ping pong your whole life.
Yeah.
I think.
Because it comes from the inside, right?
Exactly.
It's not what's happening to you.
Exactly. And then again, to make it even more complicated, think about how important trust and openness and self-knowledge how they all contribute to happiness at work. And how many places have you worked where there's a really good level of trust and openness? And so those characteristics are lacking a bit, I think. What do you think?
I think there are pockets of them in organizations, especially if it's I worked in humanitarian service. And so there were pockets of trust, but the people in power, nobody trusted all of them. There was usually one or two. So I totally agree with that. It's lacking. Well, and how can you be happy if you're not if you don't know who to trust, right?
Yeah, and then there's another issue, the whole use of power, because once you have hierarchy, you're not in control of the situation to a great extent. Even when you're at the top, you're dependent on other people. Mm-hmm. And so it's pretty complicated.
I think really complicated. It is really complicated. I never got to the pinnacle, but I was senior management, and it's no fun there either in terms of that big word, trust. Really great point. So I also just wanted to ask a little bit about happiness in this big transition we're in right now.
Can I add a few things about the ephemerality of it?
Oh, absolutely.
I just wanted to mention something that gives a little hopeful twist to what we're talking about on the transitoriness of happiness. There's a psychologist named David Myers who talks about it being a genetic predisposition, like cholesterol. There's a set point. And just like you can improve your cholesterol, you can improve your happiness. And he talks about encouraging optimism and developing self-respect and meeting goals as a way to encourage your own happiness. And you might test his idea. I think it has some value. And if you don't have those things going for you, you can act as if you do until you do have them going for you.
Well, that's how I get by. I'm usually pretty happy, but when I'm not, I just pretend.
Right. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, no. I just wanted to follow up with asking about happiness in this time of uncertainty in the workplace. Do you have any suggestions about that? And I do believe that we both concur that change is constant. So this might seem like it's big, and it is. We, I wasn't around in 1918, so I'm assuming it was kind of similar then, but different. But most of us have never seen a workforce like this. Like everybody just went home and it worked.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
I think people were really hungry to be in charge of their own lives, and that might be part of it too. But basically, I think that what happens is that during this time of accelerating change is both discombobulating and is also an opportunity, because you have more opportunities to do it your way. It's assuming you know what that is, but that's a process too, just like in a way your happiness might be a process too.
Yeah, it is.
Does that answer your question, or shall I push
It
it?
does. No, no, no. I think it can be as simple or as complex as we make it. And
Mhm.
I love that we obviously are simpatico in terms of that particular outlook about change. But
Well, it's scary to a lot of people, and
yeah,
understandably.
it is. It is. And that's the complexity of it. But
Right.
the simplicity of it is kind of like being, right? What is being? So I do want to read a few paragraphs from your book, so to ground people in your book. And it's from the first chapter. And it's about how it's individuated for the reader. You say, your work may be formal or informal, volunteer or paid, part or full-time. Perhaps it's entrepreneurial, multifaceted, significant, worthwhile, or even empty of meaning for now, ranging from being a parent to CEO. Thank you, by the way, for pairing those. With leadership and management skills in common, work has the potential to help you create a good, healthy quality of life. Part of the promise and premise of this book is to support that as you forge firm, satisfying links among happiness, joy, and work throughout lifelong learning. On the way, beware of being distracted by the quest for happiness and joy in themselves. It can gobble irretrievable time and resources, as well as distract from commitments to worthwhile, valuable accomplishments. Instead, happiness and joy are more likely to emerge from serving your true interests. And that's what you've just said. As you move forward through life's daily challenges and opportunities, choosing and creating viable adventures. In other words, happiness as well as joy are often byproducts or outcomes of authentic, effective action that animates dreams and addresses practical matters. One more paragraph. Few experts agree about what the actual specific future of work will be. How could even the most clairvoyant, brilliant ones do that, given the complexity and volatility of constant change, the multiple interacting variables? All this ambiguity and uncertainty is often beyond your control. Yet understanding the basics of what's emerging and preparing for what engages you are what you can address. You can also learn enough about how your own situation is being affected to influence it, even in modest ways. Then you'll be better able to act as many colleagues and clients, and futurists by choice have been doing, however incrementally and sometimes messily. The mess is where it's at, in my opinion. Step by step, make conscious choices from varieties of preparation and work that seem to be good matches for you. When they don't work out, see what you can learn from the experience and move on. That would be similar to my process. I've watched you in action, so that's why I chose those paragraphs, because it very succinctly talks about what the book's about and also our world's future. So Ruth, you also say that few futurists agree about what work will look like. And you advise us, instead of making career and life decisions based on predictions, to make choices from variety, this is quote, varieties of preparation and work that seem to be good matches, and to move on with the lesson if they don't work out, end quote. So you also say, quote, the answers are within you, and that's so true. Great guides and mentors like you will help us mine our own answers. And can you explain how that works?
Well, it requires a little bit of attention to yourself and to your reactions to everyday life. It's not as if it's a kind of an epiphany or anything like that. It sort of evolves over time. So chapter 5 of the book really provides a format and a process to help you do that. But you can start yourself by paying attention to what appeals to you and what attracts you and what you get bored with. The kinds of people you're attracted to and the kinds of information you want to learn more about and that kind of thing. That all gives you clues. But in chapter 5, I give you menus in several areas where you can go hunting. It's basically a form of hunting, I think. You hunting within yourself. And so you can start with the subjects and the issues that attract you. That's one list. And it's not a complete list, although it's quite long. And you can also add your own ideas to it. Then there's another aspect which relates to the transferable or the soft skills. And a fourth one that relates to the kinds of people you want to work with and for, and to benefit, actually. And then the fourth area is the kinds of venues or the situations you like to work in. And now I'm going to be a little bit, what shall I say, not arrogant, but playful. I call it string theory. And it's not about quantum gravity. That's where I sort of go over the edge to some extent. But I call it string theory because you're going to string together your answers to these questions. And I show you how to cluster them and make them manageable. And you'll string them together so that you get a description of what you want to do, or at least a tentative description to test out. And so that's my string theory idea. It's not quantum gravity, but it's quantum you. I just made that up, actually.
God, you're so brilliant.
Does that help? I think you're prejudiced.
Thank you. So one of the favorite pieces of advice you give is kind of in what you just said. You say, let information and ideas steep rather than jump or force conclusions from impatience or discomfort from ambiguity. So my question is, how do we know we're spending too much time steeping? How do we know when it's time to move on to another cup of tea?
Exactly. I love that. Now that we're on to food and recipes and things like that.
I know. I thought of you when I asked the question.
I'll continue the metaphor because actually I did a whole bunch of things that I'll tell you about later that used food as metaphors when I developed something that was a little bit too.
You just started that or just finished it when I met you.
Right, exactly. So, but anyway, this is what happens. This is how you know. So for example, if you're doing too much steeping, you know what happens when you simmer something for too long? It gets mushy, right?
It sticks to the bottom.
Right, that's another thing I didn't think of. And then you have a mess to clean on the pot. And then what happens when you steep something too long? It gets bitter, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then thirdly, what happens when you chew on something too much? It loses its flavor. And so you know immediately there's something physical almost that tells you you've been at something too long. Does that help?
It does. It's almost a sensory reaction. A little questions and comments, Kaylee. Do we have anything?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So we have a question today from Noelle Puglisi, and she's asking, can the basic principles of your book be applied to people that are retired?
Well, I don't believe in retirement to begin with because you have another 20 years ahead of you often. And in fact, I'm doing a program for Cornell in a couple of weeks about rethinking retirement. My feeling is if you have another 20 years ahead of you, what do you want to do with it? It doesn't mean you have to work in a traditional way, but you want to think in terms of where you get meaning and purpose in life. So I think the book is perfectly, from my opinion anyway, it's perfectly available to you if you consider yourself retired or you're planning on retirement. Think about how it's going to be a way of making the marvelous amount of time still available to you, sensible. And in fact, you may have to earn money at some point because increasingly a lot of people who are retiring would benefit from bringing more money in.
Mhm.
Does that answer the question?
I believe so. So I have a question then, kind of going off of what you just said. How would you define work then?
Well, because we were talking about parents doing work, I think work is anything that requires you to have a product of some kind. It can be a formal product, or it can be an informal product, but work is something that requires organization and focus and purpose, and it gives meaning in life.
I think often it's easy to just associate work with making money, and that's really it.
Yeah, exactly. But think of all the people who keep our country going who don't make much money at all.
Okay, thank you, Kaylee. And thank you, Noelle. Let us know if that didn't answer your question, but I think it probably did.
She said it did. She said,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks for the great question. I appreciate it.
So one of the things you focus on in the book, Ruth, are soft skills. You advocate soft skills, and the World Economic Forum agrees. Just a note to the audience, soft skills being things like social and communication skills versus and creativity versus coding skills or engineering.
We're gonna add a few others. Listening and synthesizing and critical thinking and learning is a big one. And in fact, if anybody's interested in assessing their own situation with soft skills, send me an email, which I'll tell you how to do that at the end. And I'll send you a self-assessment of management and leadership skills, as well as one on listening skills. So basically, the reason why soft skills are so important is because they're versatile and they apply to practice. They're positive catalysts in practically any work situation, as well as personal situations, as you can tell from what we talked about. Listening is so crucial to every aspect, right, of human relationships. And they're subtle to learn and measure. But think about kindergarten. Kids learn, right, how to work well and play well with others. In fact, I think there's a book out about that. Everything I learned in kindergarten. And I don't think that we continue that learning process as we go to more formal education, unfortunately. Maybe because they think soft skills are just not serious enough. That could be part of the problem. Job skills, the things that you need to run a program or something like that, are more serious because they earn money and you see what the results are. But there are lots of online courses. MIT has them, and they're of course expensive. But just Google soft skills and see where it takes you, because there may be opportunities to learn online. But there are options that you can have to learn soft skills without paying a lot of money. You may even have opportunities at where you work right now. But I think you can learn soft skills by observing other people who use soft skills well. And then you can collaborate with colleagues for mutual learning and feedback. And then you can ask for feedback about your own use of soft skills from people who know you well and who are both kind and tough. And then listen to yourself. Maybe even do a video of yourself in a situation, interviewing somebody or something like that. You'll pick up on things that you may want to address, or you may be proud of your use of soft skills. So I hope that that's useful for taking it to the next step.
So those are wonderful tips. And how can people reach you if they'd like that?
Just send me an email at ruth@ruthschimel.com.
And I'll put that in the comments too after. Or
Thank you.
Kaylee, you can put it in the comments if you don't mind. Thank you. So I'm going to move on. Speaking of soft skills, you mentioned Emily Anthes. Anthes, is that the way you pronounce it?
I'm not too sure how to pronounce it. Anthes, I've been pronouncing it Anthes, but I haven't asked
It
her.
makes sense. It makes sense. Okay, so she notes how language affects thought. I loved this part because I'm a communicator. Studying a culture's emotional vocabulary may open a window into how its people see the world and their ways of constructing happiness. I'm hoping you'll expand a little bit on that.
Well, let me tell you one of my favorite words, which doesn't directly relate to your curiosity about this, or well placed curiosity. Schadenfreude is something that I came up with. German always has these agglutinative words where they put together a whole bunch of different things to say something very interesting. And Schadenfreude is pleasure derived from somebody else's misfortune. Is that a great word?
Yeah, well, it's a great word. It's a very horrible thing, but I think there are many people that have that quality.
I agree. I agree. So I couldn't resist mentioning that because that's an example that tells you maybe something about the German culture. I don't know. But right now, there's a lot of playing with the word happiness in our own culture. And now they're using the word well-being a lot for happiness, which relates to being comfortable or happy or healthy. But I messed around with two languages I know something about, Spanish and much less Turkish. In Spanish, they have a lot of words that are similar to how we use the word happiness, but they add the word blessedness to happiness, which I found very interesting because of the influence of the Catholic culture there. And then in Turkish, they also have similar cognates there for the meaning of happiness, but they add glory and conformity and suitability, which reflects some of their values, I think, in their culture, having lived in Turkey for a while.
It does. It very much does. And I would say that my definition of happiness involves spirituality. I can't imagine not feeling connected to something greater than me and being happy.
That's why I added joy to it.
Yeah.
Because joy, from my perspective, joy is the one where the spiritual peace comes in.
Yeah. So I was particularly interested in your chapter that focused on the power of telling one's own story because my process that I created involves story. And if we have a little bit of time, I'd love to hear your Into the Woods story, which is in your book, just a synopsis of it. And you've incorporated it so well into the book, Ruth. I'm wondering if you can give us some advice on incorporating story into our lives and careers.
Well, first of all, I think people tend to remember stories, and they don't remember facts as well. So if you really want to have an influence on people, whether they're personal relationships or professional relationships, sometimes they go together, like ours, for example. I think that using stories, as long as they're not monologues, and there are a lot of people who just can go on and on about themselves, have you noticed? But if they're stories that relate to other people or relate to the situation you're working with, I think that they can be very powerful, and more powerful than analysis and and giving a whole list of bullets and things like that, which people really are not going to remember that much, I don't think. So, do you want me to tell my story?
I'd love that. I think we all would.
Well, this is a story that I came up with because it was when I was a little girl. And it was the way I remembered a situation, which may not be what actually happened, because you know what happens when you try to remember things from when you're younger, even when you're older, right?
Well, there is no truth. It's only perspective.
That's a good point. So this was I grew up in New York City, but we had a lot of time in the country because my father fixed up a little country house, and we had 10 miles of woods and back. and I was really entranced with nature. So basically, this is the story of how I got lost in the woods. And I was leading 3 younger kids. I was about 11, I think, and I was leading 3 other kids. So imagine wandering in a somewhat familiar deep woods at 10 years old, okay. Leading 3 younger kids starting an adventure of escape from adult supervision, which is something I always enjoyed doing. All city kids, but I was the only one familiar with many of the miles of mostly wild woods behind our modest summer house, near where New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania come together. I had often explored the woods alone while searching for spring wildflowers and other gifts of nature with my parents and large juice cans on strings hanging, there's a string theory again, on strings hanging around our necks. I used to go high bush wild blueberries picking with them on the old main logging road and off a side path. The grove was also favored by animals who probably liked the blueberries too. Their droppings gave them away. But following that known path was too easy and boring. So we wondered what we'd encounter as we moved off the logging road into more uneven, brambly terrain. We felt excited about our adventure. Never having led anybody to the woods on my own before, I also felt an edge of anxiety. At 10, I imagined myself an explorer, inspired by a favorite history book series describing the adventures of 2 boys during the French and Indian War. The location of our house also had related historical associations which fed my fantasies. I thought about the Comanche Indians living there then, and Joseph Brant leading Mohawk Indians in the area. Like them, I sometimes walked along the brook in front of our house and into the woods. I knew that because I found a takeoff on the Last of the Mohegans in the local library. It was called The Last of the Comanches. It was very exciting for me to actually read about this, about terrain that was very close to where I used to run around. So up the old logging road, we hiked for about half an mile until I felt an impulse to veer down a slope into the woods that were new to me. I had never explored that pathless area before, though our expedition was in the general area where I had spent many hours wandering, discovering, and learning the names of wildflowers, trees, and even animal droppings on my own. I was just sensing where that downward slope to the right might end up. Though I knew the main logging road was some small side trails, there was no adventure or even anything special in just repeating what was familiar. I had a good sense of direction and knew the lay of the land in the woods fairly well, where the inclines and declines were, where the general direction for home and the endless deeper woods were. But after over an hour of hiking, we still did not connect with anything I knew. Downward through the brambles, bushes, fallen branches, and piles of leaves, and then somewhat upward, we still did not connect with the main logging road that would take us back to where we started. To get my bearings, I suggested that we rest. Spying a sturdy long log for perching, I sat down and encouraged the others to sit with me. I silently wondered what to do next. Only I had experienced wandering in the woods and did not want to scare the younger kids by admitting I was unsure. Then I felt an impulse to get up and walk ahead about 30 feet, and there it was. We followed that old rutted logging road back down to the house and brook. I sensed we were all pleased with our adventure. We also avoided admitting that we had gotten lost before finding our way with some patience and intuition. We weren't even scared, though I had moments of discomfort as the responsible one. That's my story.
That's a beautiful story, and it says so much about you. That's why I love the stories that you included in the book. So thank you for sharing with us.
You're welcome. I know it was very interesting until I started to write it. I hadn't remembered a lot of those things. And what I think when you write your own stories, you may not think as though you remember a lot of things, but once you sort of dig into it, it's amazing what the brain can cough up.
It's
especially in images.
It's totally true. So collaboration, our favorite word today, because we've talked about it earlier. Why do you see collaboration as such a crucial part of work? I'll wait for the second half of the question. especially for gaining clarity, gaining one's own clarity.
You mean basically collaboration?
Why is collaboration so important?
Well, basically because I don't think we're going to get very far in honoring the future of work and doing well with it unless we are willing to collaborate, because we can't know everything. And the only way we can really benefit and expand our horizons is by working effectively with other people. Then that involves listening and finding common ground for action with meaning. I'm not talking about action for action's sake, but action with meaning and purpose that touches other people. And there are some examples of that in the book. And it requires interaction, which we don't get enough of, I think, in these days of emails and texting and things like that. So collaboration is really a departure from a lot of habitual things that we do that could benefit from variation, I think, to put it gently.
Yeah.
So with collaboration, the listening, I have a listening skills handout, which I'll be very happy to share if you email me.
Okay. So a follow-up to that is, with all this texting and emailing and liking, how can we, I have a viewpoint on this, but I would love your viewpoint about how it's best to collaborate and communicate in this computer age or internet age, to collaborate and with the internet age. I mean, a lot of it is on boards and working in teams, but I love seeing the person I'm talking to, because
Right.
I get a lot of nonverbal communication. I'm just wondering on your viewpoints about that, if any.
Well, it goes back to that idea about building trust. And you don't necessarily have to do it in an office. You can take a walk together and schmooze. You can sit on a park bench. Basically, there was a great article in the Wall Street Journal about use the phone, damn it. They didn't quite say it that way, but you can use the phone. And that's a way of starting to develop connections and collaborations and building trust. I think using a variety of approaches rather than just one means, like texting or Zooming, although Zooming I think has a lot of benefits too. I've had a lot of adventures with Zooming. I think that another thing that's really great about collaboration is it helps you hear yourself. And sometimes unless you hear yourself, you really don't know what you think. It also could benefit from a little writing and putting together some ideas for other people to grab and to understand. And I don't know about you, but whenever I have to write something, it forces me to get clearer about what I believe and what's important. And you don't have to make it into a big production. You can use bullets and things like that. You can just put some ideas down. But the important thing is to kind of have an open conversation. And I don't think we're really that great at conversation anymore. I think that requires a little practice.
Thank you. Totally agree.
We have nothing to fight about yet.
Oh, well, I'm sure we'll find it. So in these days of dynamic technology, like faster, fastest, how can a person make time for this kind of thing and for lifelong learning as well, which is another core principle of your work?
Well, I think time is precious because it's gone. When it's gone kind of thing. We can't grab it. And I think a lot of people, myself included, keep using the same habits over and over again that kind of get stale, and we need to let go. And so one of the things you may want to ask yourself is, what habits do I want to let go? What habits do I want to modify? And who can I be with that will encourage me to get out of my reactive rut, which is what happens a lot in situations. So making time to do it all is a matter of not changing necessarily, but modifying, because changing is such a big word. And I think modifying is more gentle. modifying your approach to things. The other thing is, when you're really true to yourself and you're authentic, you save a lot of time because you don't waste time doing loops and explaining things and second guessing yourself and that kind of thing. I'm also a big believer in twofers. And that is sort of like sitting on the park bench and enjoying nature while you're talking about a problem that you want to solve, or maybe learning a sport together with somebody with whom you want to improve your relationship. That would be a twofer, an example of a twofer. So the other thing is being honest about priorities. I don't know about you, but I get piggy and I want to do everything. And you can't do everything. So I'm a big list maker, which I often ignore. And but I try to see what my priorities are. When I write them down, at least I can see what the priorities are to some extent, and I know when I'm cheating. The other thing is when you're sure about where you're going and people sense that you have not necessarily a formal plan, but your motivation is clear and straightforward and honest, they're going to be attracted to you. And they want to offer assistance and they want to be part of your club. And so that can also help save time because you have colleagues, and they may not necessarily collaborate with you, but you have colleagues to play with. And let's see. The other thing is, I'm a big believer in developing faith in yourself, because that leads to confidence. Doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. In fact, I learn more from my mistakes from the other things I do often. But when you have faith in yourself, it leads to confidence and then to effective action. And the more you act and the more you appreciate your actions and you learn from them, the more time you can save. And then the bottom line basically on all of this in terms of how do you do this, how do you make time in all this dynamic mess, you really don't have any choice. Because if you want to invest in a meaningful, successful future for yourself, you really have to make the time, and you have to let go of things that you're doing and reassess what's really important to you, because passivity rarely pays. How's that?
Really good. So you had said this was an essential aspect of the book, and so I want to make sure to get this part in. Preparing for your work in the future is a job, and it's a big job. So how do we attend to the rest of life while preparing for such an unknown?
Well, especially when you have responsibilities with a family or with commitments. I have family by choice, and I'm very committed to helping one of my family members work out some of her issues, and she's very helpful to me as well. And I think that it really goes back to what I was just talking about in terms of making the time. What habit gets in the way of your being true to yourself? It goes back to what you were talking about before we did before we started this interview. I think that some habits are good, and because they provide a certain routine and a certain predictability that gives you a sense of comfort, but that the more you base your life on habits, the more boring it is, and the less opportunities you have for learning. And so it's a matter of being with people who challenge you in kind ways, and opening up opportunities for yourself where you will avoid being caught up in doing things the comfortable way, as opposed to the not necessarily new ways, but different ways.
That's why I travel. I get so much inspiration and feel most at home with myself when I am in a completely different environment. And I hope that the travel system opens up again soon.
Oh, it is.
For us all, because I think we've all been stuck at home and it can stymie us.
But I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because I think that having been in the Foreign Service and living in different countries, I lived in India for 2 years and in Ecuador and Guatemala for 2 years each. And I've also traveled. I traveled to Turkey and I traveled to Hong Kong and places like that. And I find that unless I can live in a particular place for a while and get to know the people, it's not much of a learning experience for me, because it becomes more of a visual, I've been there and I've done that kind of thing. So I have a different modus operandi, and travel per se is not that appealing to me.
Well, and like that goes into being yourself, right? I'm not you and you're not me.
Exactly.
So, and I would disagree with that to a certain degree,
Mhm.
because I've lived in Europe, I lived there 5 years, and I've lived in Africa for a year. And while those were more immersive and I definitely got more out of it, I need travel in my life as opposed to sitting at a computer or even raising my children, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's about finding what feeds your soul and not somebody else's. So that's why vive la différence. So I think we're winding down, and I'm going to skip over procrastination, or at least come back to it if we have some time. And I'd like to talk about school a little. Experts say that today's school children will not be employed in 65% of current jobs. With statistics like this in mind, how can we stay grounded in our career path? And what's our next best step? Both, the kids and the teachers and the school system. And you've got a background in academics, so I'd love your perspective.
My parents were teachers too.
Mhm.
And
Mine too, both of them.
yeah, and so we won't go there, but basically they have done iterations of reforming the school systems for decades and decades, and they haven't made much progress. I'm not impressed with it at all. I think that the inspired teachers are the ones that really make a difference in people's lives, as both you and I have seen in our own lives. I still remember the names of my teachers from public school and from the Bronx High School of Science when I wanted to be an architect or a biochemist. And I think that quality of teaching is probably not as available as it used to be, because they don't pay teachers enough, and the training for teachers is fairly mundane. And so a lot of people who could be really creative teachers aren't attracted to teaching. And so it depends on, I think a lot depends on the relationship. They're doing some, there are a couple of experiments that are going on that are quite good, where the students themselves are involved with designing the courses and giving feedback loops to the teachers, and they get out of that whole hierarchical control mode. But I don't think that the political framework for providing good school systems is there. And I also think that there's a rigidity that we have not been able to transcend. And I'm really concerned about it. So I think so much depends on the home situation. I mean, I don't remember having dinner without talking about a new word that we learned or something like that. And a lot of kids don't have that kind of environment, that kind of enriched environment at home. And I think maybe one of the things we need to do is, what do we do outside the school system to provide opportunities for kids who don't have that kind of enriched environment? I mean, even you can do things on the playground, for example, that could be very useful. I remember Miss Rose on my playground in the Bronx. And she was Black, which is really interesting because that was a very rare thing. And I also had a Black kindergarten teacher. And I think that made a big difference in my life. Just like I think for Black kids, it's important to have Black teachers, and it's important for white kids to have Black teachers too.
Well, thank goodness it's not even an issue anymore. But my public school was integrated when I was 8. And so then everything just became normalized, in my opinion. But of course, I'm a person of privilege because I'm white, right?
Right.
But there were all kinds of cultures, both at the teacher level and the student level. But it might not be the same in other places.
Well, reading, I think, is really a very important, the adventure of reading. I remember I was talking about the last of the Cahoonshis book, where we, in the summertime, I would go to the Carnegie Library in Fort Jervis. And they allowed me, I was a kid, and they allowed me into the adults area and to the kids areas. And I got books from both areas, and I come home every week with my arms full of books. And I had a lot of adventures reading. But again, reading skills are not necessarily up to par for a lot of kids. And so how do you work with that? I mean, that adventure is not there for people.
Mhm.
So there's something very bifurcated about our society, I think, in terms of making opportunity available. It's not a happy thing to talk about.
No, it's not. And yet I feel like if we open the conversation more, it gets us a little bit further, maybe another millimeter toward a better system.
Right.
So thank you for talking to me about it. So you quote an economist, John Maynard Keynes, right after your subhead, joy in work. And we're not going to joy, but the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as in escaping from old ones. So how do we get mired in, you've touched on this a little bit, but how do we break away from the mundane, the routine way of doing things, and develop new ways?
That relates right back to what we were talking about, the school system too.
Bring it full circle.
Yeah, I think that what's really important is to connect with people who are different from yourself, who think differently, who act differently, and to develop relationships of trust and sharing where you can learn from one another. And that might be one way to break out a little bit, but that takes time. That very precious word you brought up earlier. It takes time and it takes commitment. And a lot of people are in reactive modes and sort of little gerbils running around, myself sometimes as well. So I think that it's hard to break those routines. But if you do, maybe if you make a deal with yourself to do once a month, to find some kind of outreach that's going to take you away from routine. If you make a routine of breaking away, that might help a little.
Well, thank you, Ruth Schimel. So if you were to leave listeners with one piece of advice to act on today, of everything you've shared, what would it be?
Well, I have had difficulty giving advice because it really relates to the individual and what's important to them and whether they want to receive the advice. And so I think what's really important, whether you read the book or not, is to anyone listening to this to take one aspect of what we were talking about here and decide on one action you will take that you would enjoy and that you might be able to share with another person for collaboration, and do it. And if you can make that a fairly regular habit, a positive habit, that might be very creative.
That's okay. Please feel free to drink water. I'm going to show you my tea bag wisdom and read it to you. This is part of every show. They're always right. That's just to show you it's real. Live light, travel light, spread the light, be the light. These are yogi
That's
teas.
lovely. I like that.
I do too. Have anything else from the audience?
Yes, we have one last question from Noelle Puglisi, and she asked, what was your specific motivation for writing this book?
Because it relates to what I care about, which is work and people's capacity to be fully themselves. And it also brings together, it integrates a lot of my concerns about meaning in life. But also another motivation for it was that I didn't see anything like that out there. And I like to be original and also make a contribution.
How can people find you? We've got your email in the comments.
And my website is ruthschimel.com, www.ruthschimel.com.
And Schimel is spelled Schimel.
Mm-hmm.
And keep going.
And of course, they can find me on Amazon where my 7 books are.
Right.
If they want to play with them.
They're wonderful books, Ruth, and you've offered a wonderful interview. I thank you very much.
I have one more quote from my first 6 books about courage. Do we have time for that?
Sure.
People think of courage as something that they either have or they don't have. And in fact, most of us have the capacity for it. It's a process of becoming. This is based on my dissertation research for my Ph.D. And it involves the willingness to realize, it involves the willingness to realize your true capacities by going through discomfort, fear, anxiety, or suffering, and taking wholehearted, responsible action. So I think that's something that may be useful for the future of work.
I totally.
As well as the future of you.
Thank you so much. And viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. A special thanks for Noelle for her questions. And please join me next Thursday on my author Facebook page, as I'll be interviewing well-known and well-loved Patricia Sands, who is a world traveler like me, and author of 8 novels, including the poignant novel Drawing Lessons, which is a tale of both grief and renewal. You'll have to tune in to see how it's both. And most of it takes place in Provence, which it's probably my top 3 places I've ever spent any time. You can join me here every second Thursday at my Facebook page, interviewing fascinating people like Ruth who enrich our lives. And all of the interviews will be archived on YouTube. Like I said, you can find Ruth in the comments. Her email's in the comments. And she's at ruthschimel.com. Her books are on Amazon. And you can find more about me and my work at shoresofourSouls.com and ground1coaching.com. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you next Thursday. Until then, this is Kathy Ramsperger bidding you a good weekend with a great book. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. It was marvelous being with you both.
Same.
Thank you.